The ambush. It was supposed to be a quiet Monday morning in New York. The ABC studios buzzed with their usual rhythm, makeup brushes clattering, producers whispering into headsets, audience members filing in with nervous excitement. On the guest list that day was someone who rarely made such appearances, the actor loved worldwide for his humility, Keanu Reeves. He had agreed to promote his upcoming film, nothing more. Backstage, Keanu arrived in his calm way. No entourage, no flashing display, just a simple black suit, hair loose, and a quiet smile. The makeup artist leaned in and whispered, "Sir, just be careful. Joy Behar's in one of her moods." He gave a polite nod, not realizing how heavy those words would soon feel. The rehearsal felt normal. A walk-on, a smile, a handshake with the hosts. Yet, as he observed, Keanu sensed a different air, one that felt sharp, like a storm hiding behind friendly skies. Producers avoided his eyes. The usual prep questions never came. He brushed it off. After all, he had faced countless interviews. What could go wrong? The show began. Applause thundered as Whoopi introduced him. Hollywood's most humble star, the man from The Matrix and John Wick, please welcome Keanu Reeves. He walked out, shaking hands warmly, smiling for the audience. But Joy Behar's grip was cold, her smile tight, her eyes already loaded with something heavier than curiosity. The opening minutes were easy, questions about training, stunts, favorite scenes. Keanu answered with his trademark modesty, the crowd responding with laughter and warmth. But then without warning, Joy leaned forward, her tone cut the air like glass. "Keanu, do you consider yourself politically conscious, or do you live in a bubble of privilege pretending to be just like ordinary people?" The audience shifted. The warmth evaporated. Whoopi glanced sideways, startled. Keanu paused, his calm composure steadying him. "I try to stay informed like any citizen," he answered softly. Joy smirked. "Interesting. Because some would say actors like you profit off billions while the rest of America can't pay their bills, and then you eat sandwiches on the street for cameras. What a performance." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Some murmured, others folded their arms. Keanu's agent backstage clenched his fists. Keanu took a deep breath. "I don't ride the subway for attention. I do it because it's real life. I eat when I'm hungry, not for an audience." Joy laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Come on, isn't the truth that you curate this humble guy act? That every kindness, every donation, is just carefully leaked PR?" The words hit hard. For decades, Keanu had gone to lengths to keep his charity work quiet. He had never sought headlines for giving away earnings or supporting sick children. Yet Joy had twisted it, turning his humility into a weapon against him. Whoopi tried to step in. "Joy, maybe we should—" "No, Whoopi," Joy snapped. "The public deserves the truth. Isn't it convenient how your so-called generosity always finds its way into the news?" The audience gasped. The tension was heavy enough to choke on. Keanu shifted in his chair, his hands clasped. "Joy, I never release those stories. I prefer to keep that private." Her eyes narrowed, smelling blood. "And yet, here you sit, Hollywood saint. But let's be real, Reeves. You grew up safe, middle class, never truly struggled. So how dare you act like you understand the suffering of real Americans?" The crowd grew restless. Some shook their heads, others stared in disbelief. Keanu's jaw tightened. Memories of years scraping by, sleeping in cars, losing his loved ones, all twisted by her cruel narrative. Still, his voice remained calm. "I never claimed to understand every struggle, only that every person deserves respect." But Joy wasn't finished. She flipped a card, her smile almost venomous. "And about your personal tragedies, don't you find it strange that pain follows you everywhere? A daughter lost, relationships ended. Maybe the truth is, there's a pattern with you." The studio fell into dead silence. No one breathed. The cruelty of her insinuation hung like poison in the air. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to keep rolling. For the first time, Keanu's calm eyes hardened. His lips parted, his voice low but strong, trembling with something dangerous. "Joy," he said, every word cutting like stone, "you will not use my daughter's death as your entertainment." The audience gasped. Whoopi's hand slammed the table. "That's enough," she barked, but Joy leaned back, smirking as if she had won. She had no idea that she had just awakened something in the man known for patience, the man loved for his silence. The Keanu Reeves the world knew was kind, but the Keanu who now sat under the hot lights of The View was about to show the difference between kindness and weakness. The studio air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The audience sat frozen, their applause and laughter from earlier now distant echoes. Keanu's calm voice had changed, lower, sharper, carrying an authority that no one expected. "Joy," he repeated, eyes locked on hers, "you will not use my daughter's death as a tool for your ratings." The words cut through the room like thunder. Joy shifted in her chair, her smirk faltering for the first time, but her pride, sharpened by years of provocation, pushed her forward. "Oh, look at this," she said, her tone mocking. "The mask slips. Hollywood's kindest man finally shows his anger." Some in the crowd gasped at her cruelty. Others crossed their arms, visibly uncomfortable. But Keanu did not flinch. He sat straighter, his presence filling the space. "You think my kindness is a mask?" he said quietly, his voice carrying across every corner of the studio. "You mistake respect for weakness. You mistake humility for performance. That is your mistake, not mine." Backstage, his agent Marcus pressed his hands to his face. This was no longer an interview, it was a public trial, and the cameras were still rolling. Joy leaned forward again, unwilling to let go. "So you deny it? You deny using tragedy to gain sympathy? You deny writing this saintly image to keep fans on your side?" Keanu's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I never asked for sympathy. I never asked to be called a saint. I only try to live as a human being who knows what it means to lose." The audience shifted, whispers spreading. People began recording on their phones. A storm was forming, not against Keanu, but against Joy. Whoopi Goldberg slammed her palm on the table. "Enough, Joy. This isn't journalism. It's cruelty." But Joy ignored her co-host, her eyes glittering with something almost desperate. "No, Whoopi, this is honesty. This is stripping away the Hollywood act." She turned back to Keanu. "Tell me then, what do you want people to believe? That you give away millions because you're selfless? That you ride the subway because you're humble? That you—" Keanu raised his hand and she fell silent, stunned. There was no aggression in the gesture, but the weight of it silenced her more than shouting ever could. "I don't want people to believe anything," he said, rising slowly from his chair. The audience held their breath. "I want people to be treated with dignity. I want respect to be the starting point, not cruelty, not suspicion." The cameras zoomed in as he stepped forward, every movement deliberate. The man known for stillness was now commanding the stage without effort. "You see, Joy," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "your anger isn't about me, it's about you. You look at me and see someone you think has everything, fame, money, peace, achieve. And instead of asking why kindness matters to me, you try to tear it apart because it reminds you of what you've lost." Joy blinked, caught off guard. For the first time, her cards trembled in her hands. "You wanted to make me small," Keanu said, standing tall at the edge of the table. "But you forgot something. Humility is not weakness. Kindness is not a performance. And pain is not your weapon." The audience erupted, some clapping, others gasping, a wave of support breaking through the tension. Phones lit up as people captured the moment live. Joy tried to regain her footing. She forced a laugh, though her voice cracked. "So now you're the teacher, Keanu? Preaching lessons to the rest of us?" Keanu leaned down slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "Not preaching, just reminding. Because if we use someone else's suffering as entertainment, then we lose what makes us human." The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their red lights blinking like nervous eyes. Keanu straightened, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. He had been underestimated, provoked, even mocked. But now, the balance had shifted. The audience wasn't watching a victim anymore. They were watching a man reclaim his dignity in real time. And Joy Behar, who thought she could control the narrative, was beginning to realize she had just stepped into a storm she couldn't escape. The room felt like it had shrunk. Every breath, every shuffle, every whisper echoed in the silence. Keanu Reeves stood tall, his figure calm but charged with something powerful. The audience leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single word. Joy Behar tried to compose herself, flipping through her cards as if the ink on them could save her. But the lines she had prepared were useless now. Keanu's presence had shifted everything. "You wanted honesty," Keanu said, his tone steady but carrying the weight of years unspoken. "So let me tell you about my life." The audience still, and even the crew lowered their heads as if bracing for something sacred. "My father left when I was 3, Keanu continued. "He disappeared, and I grew up learning that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about the people who stand with you when you have nothing." His words cut through the air, not as defense, but as raw truth. The cameras zoomed in. Viewers at home could see the glimmer of pain in his eyes. "I came to Hollywood with nothing," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I worked odd jobs, I slept in cars, I lived off cheap noodles, not because it was a romantic dream, but because I had no other way to keep going. There was no safety net, just persistence." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others nodded quietly. Joy opened her mouth, but Keanu lifted his hand again, silencing her. "And then came the losses," he said, his voice dipping low. "My daughter. She never took a breath in this world. I never got to hold her, never got to hear her laugh. I lost the woman I loved soon after, and later my best friend." He paused, steadying himself. "Each time, I could have fallen apart, but I didn't. I carried on, not because I'm strong, but because kindness from strangers reminded me to keep living." The studio was silent, except for the soft sounds of people crying. Even Whoopi wiped a tear from her eye. "You said my kindness is a performance," Keanu continued, locking eyes with Joy. "But kindness was what saved me. It was the nurse who stayed past her shift to comfort me. It was the fan who wrote me a letter saying my movies helped them survive depression. It was the crew members who became my family when I had none. That's not performance, that's humanity." The audience erupted in applause, unable to contain themselves. Some stood clapping, shouting his name. Keanu waited quietly, letting the noise rise and fall before speaking again. "Money?" He shook his head. "Yes, I've earned more than I ever dreamed. But money is just a tool. I've given most of it away, not because I want praise, but because I've seen what suffering looks like. I've seen children fight cancer with more courage than any of us will ever know. I've seen parents working 3 jobs and still struggling to feed their families, and you ask if I do it for image? No. I do it because I can, and because if you can help, you must." Joy was pale now, her defiance cracked. She fumbled with her cards, but the papers shook in her trembling hands. "You thought you could expose me," Keanu said softly. "But there's nothing to expose. My pain is real, my choices are real, and the kindness I try to live by, that's real too." The audience roared again, their cheers filling the studio like a tidal wave. The tension had flipped. Keanu was no longer the man under fire, he was the one holding the torch, lighting up everything false around him. Joy tried to speak over the applause, her voice breaking. You think you're untouchable, but the world doesn't need your sob stories, it needs the truth." Keanu turned his gaze to her, calm but unyielding. "The truth is simple, Joy. Cruelty reveals weakness, kindness reveals strength, and right now, everyone here can see the difference." The crowd erupted again, louder than ever before. People were chanting his name, holding up their phones to capture the moment that was already becoming historic. Joy Behar sat frozen, her power slipping away with every second. She had set the trap, but now she was the one caught inside it. And Keanu Reeves wasn't finished. The studio lights glared, but no one noticed them anymore. Every pair of eyes, hosts, crew, audience, was locked on Keanu Reeves. What had begun as a hostile interview was transforming into something no one could have scripted. Keanu turned from Joy and looked directly into the cameras. His calm face filled the screens of millions watching live. H. His voice carried not only through the studio but through living rooms across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, what you've seen today is more than a conversation. You've seen how cruelty can be disguised as honesty and how entertainment can become an excuse to humiliate. The audience fell silent again, the applause dying into stillness. Everyone knew he was no longer just speaking to Joy Behar, he was speaking to the world. But I want you to see something else, Keanu continued. I want you to see what happens when we refuse to accept cruelty as normal, when we stand up and say, respect is not optional, dignity is not a performance, every human being deserves it. The crowd burst into cheers, clapping until their hands ached, phones lifted higher, capturing every second. Clips were already racing across social media, hashtags exploding into existence. Joy tried to interject, her voice weak. This is a talk show, Keanu. People want tough questions. He turned back to her, his eyes steady. There's a difference between tough questions and tearing someone apart. You didn't ask questions to seek truth, Joy. You asked questions to wound. And when you brought up my daughter, you didn't just cross a line, you erased it. Gasps rippled through the room again. Joy flinched, her hands trembling. For the first time, her usual armor of sarcasm was gone. Keanu stepped closer to the table, his voice lowering but growing sharper. Do you know what grief is, Joy? It's waking up every morning with an empty space where someone should be. It's seeing birthdays pass that will never be celebrated. It's living with a silence that never ends, and you tried to use that silence as a weapon. The audience was no longer just watching, they were feeling every word. Some cried openly, others reached out to hold the hands of strangers. But here's the truth, Keanu said, stern, tightening, his voice steady again. Grief can break you, or it can teach you compassion. And I chose compassion. That's why I treat crew members like family. That's why I give without needing credit. That's why I ride the subway and share a smile with strangers. Not because it looks good, but because every human connection is sacred. The cheers returned, louder this time, rolling like thunder across the studio. Joy's face had gone pale, her smirk gone completely. She tried to lift her cue cards, but her hands shook so badly the papers slipped onto the desk. No one noticed. All attention belonged to the man standing in front of her. Keanu turned once more to the cameras. If you're watching this, he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality, remember this moment. Don't judge someone by the stories you hear or the rumors you read. Judge them by how they treat the people who can do nothing for them, because that's who they really are. The audience leapt to their feet, applause crashing through the studio like a wave. People shouted his name, some even chanted, respect, respect. Whoopi Goldberg, eyes glistening, leaned toward her mic. I've been in this business a long time, she said, and I've never seen anything like this. Keanu, thank you. But Keanu wasn't finished. He turned back to Joy, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. You wanted to expose me, Joy, but all you did was expose yourself. And maybe, just maybe, the world needed to see that cruelty doesn't make you strong. It makes you small. The crowd gasped, then roared louder than ever before. Joy sat frozen, unable to respond, her power gone, her platform crumbling under the weight of her own choices. And in that moment, Keanu Reeves did something no one expected. He reached down, unhooked his microphone, and placed it gently on the table. The gesture spoke louder than any insult. He was done playing her game. The audience erupted again, cheering so loud the walls shook. The man known for silence had just created a moment that would echo across the world. But as Keanu turned to leave, Joy's voice, cracked and desperate, cut through the noise. You think walking away makes you the winner? You think kindness will save you from the truth? Keanu stopped mid-step, his back to her. The studio froze, waiting for his response. The final word. The studio was so silent that the hum of the cameras could be heard. Keanu Reeves stood with his back to Joy Behar, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk. His microphone was already set down, his intention to leave clear, yet her cracked, desperate words had stopped him. You think kindness will save you from the truth? Joy repeated, her voice trembling, half anger, half fear. Slowly Keanu turned. His eyes, calm but burning with quiet intensity, met hers across the table, The audience held its breath. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. "The truth, Joy," he said softly, "is that kindness doesn't need to save me. It saves everyone else." The words landed like a thunderclap. Some in the audience gasped, others applauded immediately. Keanu's voice rose steady and commanding, as though the studio had become a courtroom and he was delivering a verdict. "You see," he continued, stepping forward, "people think cruelty is power. They think cutting someone down makes them stronger. But cruelty doesn't build anything, it only destroys. Real power is the ability to stay kind when the world gives you every reason not to." Joy's lips trembled, but no sound came. She was trapped, not by Keanu's anger but by his unshakable calm. "You accused me of using my daughter's death for sympathy," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you know what her name was, Joy? Ava. She would have been 25 this year. I've carried that loss every single day. And instead of hiding from it, I use it to remember that every person I meet might be carrying a loss too." Tears welled in the eyes of audience members. Some clutched their chests. Even crew members lowered their cameras for a moment, overcome. "That's why I stop for fans in the street," Keanu said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's why I treat crew members with respect. That's why I donate quietly, ride the subway, share a sandwich with a stranger. Not because it's a performance, because kindness is how we survive grief. Kindness is how we keep going." The applause was deafening now, rolling like waves. People shouted his name. Some cried openly, chanting, "Respect, respect." Joy Behar, pale and shaken, whispered, I didn't mean." Keanu raised his hand gently, silencing her again. "Yes, you did. And that's why this moment matters. Because now everyone watching can see the cost of cruelty and the value of compassion." He turned once more to the cameras, his voice carrying to every home. "If you take anything from this, let it be this. Never use someone's pain as your weapon. Never mistake humility for weakness. And never forget, every human being you meet is fighting battles you can't see. So choose kindness." The audience erupted again, many now standing on their feet, clapping, cheering, chanting his name. Keanu let the applause wash over him but did not bask in it. Instead, he gave a simple nod, his eyes filled with quiet strength. Then he picked up his jacket, placed it neatly over his arm, and began walking toward the studio exit. The cameras followed, capturing every step. The image of Keanu Reeves leaving the view with dignity while the audience stood in ovation would soon circle the globe. Behind him, Joy Behar sat motionless, her cue cards scattered, her authority shattered. She looked smaller than ever before, dwarfed not by his anger, but by his grace. The studio doors closed behind him with a soft thud that seemed to echo like a gavel striking in judgment. And just like that, Keanu Reeves had transformed what was meant to be his humiliation into one of the most unforgettable moments of live television. The aftermath. When Keanu Reeves stepped out of the studio doors, the noise of the city hit him like a wave, horns blaring, cameras flashing, reporters shouting. Within minutes, the clip of his walkout was already racing across social media. Hashtags like respect, Keanu, and kindness is strength exploded worldwide. Inside, chaos reigned. Audience members shouted over one another, some demanding the show cut Joy off immediately, others stunned into silence. The producers argued in frantic whispers about whether to apologize on air or let the broadcast stand as it was. But it was too late. The world had seen everything. By nightfall, major news networks replayed the moment again and again. Headlines read, "Keanu stands tall on live TV. When kindness became power. Joy Behar crosses line, faces backlash." Commentators debated, celebrities posted in support, and ordinary people filled timelines with stories of how Keanu's words had touched them. Meanwhile, Joy Behar sat alone in her dressing room. The makeup streaked on her cheeks told the story of tears she hadn't shown on camera. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, not with support, but with condemnation. For years she had wielded sarcasm like a sword, but tonight, that sword had turned back on her. She whispered to herself, "What have I done?" In the days that followed, the fallout grew heavier. Sponsors pulled ads from the show. Petitions circulated demanding Joy's resignation. Even her colleagues, silent during the confrontation, spoke out afterward, admitting the cruelty had gone too far. For the first time in her long career, Joy Behar was not in control of the narrative. And while the storm consumed her, Keanu remained silent. He gave no interviews, no press statements, no victory laps. When reporters cornered him at the airport, he offered only 5 words: be kind to each other. But what he did had next surprised everyone. Instead of capitalizing on the global attention, he quietly announced the launch of the Ava Foundation, named after his late daughter. Its mission: to support families who had lost children and to fund cancer research for kids. He refused to hold a press conference. Instead, he let the foundation's work speak for itself. The contrast was striking. Joy's career unraveled in public while Keanu's quiet dignity grew into a movement. Across schools, offices, and homes, people repeated his words: kindness is not weakness. Teachers wrote it on chalkboards. Activists used it in speeches. Strangers shared it on posters and t-shirts. It became more than a quote. It became a call to action. Months later, far from cameras and headlines, Joy Behar disappeared from the spotlight. She sold her New York apartment and retreated to a quiet town in Vermont. There, she began volunteering at a children's hospital, reading books, helping with art projects, sitting with kids through treatments. For the first time in decades, she wasn't speaking for an audience. She was listening. One afternoon, a child asked her, "Miss Joy, why are you here every day?" She hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because once I forgot how to be kind, and I'm trying to learn again." Back in Los Angeles, Keanu sat at his foundation's office, reviewing letters. Thousands poured in daily, stories of people inspired by his stand, families grateful for support, strangers promising to choose respect over cruelty. He read each one slowly, quietly, sometimes with tears in his eyes. When asked years later about that day on The View, he would smile gently and say, "It was never about winning an argument. It was about reminding people of something simple: respect everyone. You never know what battles they're fighting." And that is how one morning interview meant to promote a movie became a cultural turning point. How an ambush designed to humiliate became a lesson broadcast to millions. How a man known for silence proved that kindness, even under attack, can roar louder than cruelty. The clip of Keanu Reeves storming off the set lived on, replayed millions of times, but what endured even longer were his words. They traveled further than the studio walls, further than headlines, straight into the hearts of those who had ever been mocked, underestimated, or dismissed. Because in the end, the real story wasn't about Joy Behar's downfall or Keanu Reeves's victory. It was about the reminder that every choice, every word, every action builds the world we live in. And when faced with cruelty, we always have a choice: to answer anger with more anger, or to do what Keanu Reeves did that day: stand tall, walk away, and leave behind a lesson the world would never forget. Kindness is strength, respect is power, and dignity always wins.